This is the Epic Mickey Iceberg, encompassing dozens and dozens of topics from the beginning of Disney's history to Epic Mickey's beta all the way up to today. It's packed with cool entries that deserve discussion. In case you don't know how an iceberg image works, each topic is placed into separate tiers, in this case 5. The higher tiers hold well-known information, but the further down you go, the deeper down the iceberg you go. And eventually you get to some entries that are so obscure that there's hardly any information available about them. This image was made by BrotherGunned, and afterwards I edited it a little bit myself just to add some things or move some entries around the different tiers. But I don't want to waste any more time. I'm going to be explaining all of them in this video starting from top to bottom. Tier 1. The first tier of the iceberg is dedicated to very basic information about the game and mostly just serves to introduce certain people and game mechanics that will be referred back to during later entries in the iceberg. Warren Spector. Warren Spector is pretty much the man behind Epic Mickey. He was the director for the Epic Mickey games, and some other games he's directed are System Shock or Deus Ex. He's a huge Disney fan himself and is pretty much entirely responsible for the Playstyle Matters gameplay that Epic Mickey has. It's also important that we mention him here in Tier 1 because his name is going to pop up a few more times throughout the rest of the iceberg. The Gremlins. The Gremlins are one of the common NPCs found throughout the Epic Mickey games. Most of them are trapped in cages and will help Mickey if the player decides to free them. The Gremlins originate from a Roald Dahl book, yes, that Roald Dahl, from 1943 called The Gremlins, and it is in fact Roald Dahl's first book. In this book, the Gremlins are these sort of mythical tiny creatures that sabotage planes in World War II, which was an idea inspired by real World War II pilots who came up with the idea of the Gremlins being responsible for mechanical problems with military aircrafts. What this has to do with Disney is that the Gremlins book was written for Walt Disney Productions with the idea that the book was going to be adapted into a full animated movie. But unfortunately, the movie was abandoned and scrapped, which caused the Gremlins to end up in Wasteland. Wasteland. This one is obviously pretty basic. Wasteland is a place that originates from the Epic Mickey games and was created by the wizard Yen Sid as a place for forgotten or scrapped Disney characters. So this applies to everything from characters, specific iterations of characters, scrapped designs of characters, etc., as well as Disney-produced merchandise or licensed merchandise, all of which are forgotten or just unknown by the general public. Chase Jones. Chase Jones was the lead designer for the Epic Mickey games and was heavily involved with the development of them. In more recent years, he's been open to answering questions about the games from fans, so it's good to know about him now because I'll be using his word as sources for some entries later. Projector levels are based off real cartoons. This one pretty much speaks for itself. Throughout the Epic Mickey games, you come across these 2D side-scrolling levels, and all of these levels are based off of real Disney cartoons. Some of these projector levels take you to Steamboat Willie or Fantasia, or even some Oswald cartoons like Oh What a Night or Trolley Troubles. Jim Dooley. Jim Dooley was the composer for Epic Mickey and Epic Mickey 2's music. Besides Epic Mickey, he's also composed for the Infamous games and Jak and Daxter. On his YouTube channel in 2020, he uploaded a ton of high-quality music from the Epic Mickey games, which even included some early revisions of songs and even some songs that went entirely unused and were lost until he had uploaded them. He's been open to answering comments from fans on his YouTube channel, so you'll probably see his name pop up a few times in later tiers of the iceberg. THQ Nordic and Purple Lamp. THQ Nordic is the publisher of Epic Mickey Rebrushed, and Purple Lamp was the studio behind the actual development of the game, and both are based in Vienna, Austria. THQ Nordic is one of the many publishing companies owned by Embracer. Originally it was just called Nordic Games, but it was eventually renamed to THQ Nordic after Embracer bought the THQ trademark. As for Purple Lamp, it was placed under THQ Nordic as its parent company by Embracer in 2020, and since then the studio has also developed SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated and Cosmic Shake. Thinner Disaster. The Thinner Disaster is one of the major plot points in Epic Mickey that happens during the intro cutscene of the first game. Basically, Mickey stumbled across Yen Sid's workshop and found a bottle of thinner, which would end up being known as the Jug, and he spilled it all over a portal to Wasteland, which caused a massive wave of thinner to destroy Wasteland. Well, in some versions it's actually not a wave of thinner, but we'll get to that later. Yen Sid. As I've already mentioned, Yen Sid is the wizard that created Wasteland. He originates from the Fantasia movie, but he's also seen in the Kingdom Hearts games. And obviously his name is just Disney spelled backwards. Donnie Hamilton concept art. Alright, now we're finally getting to something interesting. There's a good chance that you've seen these pieces of concept art around the internet somewhere. These were created by the artist Donnie Hamilton with the purpose of seeing just how dark they could make Epic Mickey without Disney intervening. So most of the ideas portrayed in them were likely not really considered to actually be implemented into the game. These pieces of concept art are usually shared around the internet every once in a while, and everyone says, "Oh, look at how dark Epic Mickey was gonna be." But as I just explained, that wasn't really the case. Another thing is that these darker pieces of concept art were actually leaked before Epic Mickey was officially announced, which kind of gave people a wrong impression of what the games were actually going to be like. Junction Point. This is going to be a pretty quick one. Junction Point was the studio behind the development of the original Epic Mickey games, those being EM1, EM2, and Power of Illusion. The studio was closed in January 2013, only a few months after Epic Mickey 2 was released. Disney. Unless you've been living under a rock your entire life, you know what Disney is. I mean, it is the top of the iceberg, I guess. But yeah, Disney is a massive entertainment company that was created by Walt Disney in 1923, and the Epic Mickey games take characters, locations, and merchandise from Disney's entire history of films and theme parks. Playstyle matters. Playstyle matters is the term for a certain type of storytelling in video games where the player's actions will affect the story in some way. Epic Mickey, for one, is a game that has this playstyle matters type of storytelling, as you're able to go about most scenarios in multiple different ways. Most of the time, these decisions revolve around using paint or thinner, where one option is the morally good path and the other is the evil path. Epic Mickey Wiki. The Epic Mickey Wiki is a fandom wiki dedicated to the Epic Mickey games. It's a pretty good resource for information, and I myself have used it as a resource for some of my videos. As it turns out, even Purple Lamp used the wiki as a resource when they were developing Rebrushed, which is something that I'll bring up again later, but it's cool to see how the community was able to give back to the developers in that way. Epiculus. Epiculus is the name of a song by Ditto Music that was actually commissioned by Disney Interactive for promotional purposes. The song uses tons of samples from Epic Mickey, like some voice lines from the cutscenes, and some melodies from the game such as the Dark Beauty Castle theme. A lot of people seem to remember hearing this song or have at least seen it on YouTube, so I decided to move it up to tier 1. Oswald's origins. The real story of Oswald as a character is actually pretty interesting and is a fairly big plot point in Epic Mickey. Oswald was created by Walt Disney and Works all the way back in 1927, which is even before Mickey was created. A total of 27 Oswald shorts were created before Disney lost the rights to him. It's at this point that Oswald would have ended up in Wasteland, and in the game it's mentioned that he's the first character to fall to Wasteland. Because of this, he was looked up to by other toons in Wasteland and eventually became the leader. Back in the real world, Disney would go back to the drawing board and come up with Mickey Mouse, who would of course go on to be the most famous cartoon character in the world. The Pete's. Throughout Epic Mickey, you'll come across several different versions of Pete. Pete Pan, Small Pete, Pete-tronic, and Big Bad Pete are the 4 main Petes, but there are also other depictions of Pete in the games, like in the Steamboat Willie projector. There are also some other versions of Pete, like Pirate Pete, Colonel Pete, or Terminator Pete, that aren't actually seen in the games, but we'll get around to that in another tier. Mad Doctor. This entry is referring to the Mad Doctor as a character, who is the second antagonist of the first Epic Mickey game and the main antagonist of Epic Mickey 2. He originates from a 1933 Mickey Mouse cartoon also called The Mad Doctor. The Mad Doctor cartoon is also used in 2 of the projector levels in the first Epic Mickey game. Horace Horsecollar. Horace is a character created in 1929 by Walt Disney and Works themselves. His first appearance was in a cartoon called The Plowboy, but nowadays he doesn't get very many film appearances. Horace is also a character in Epic Mickey, and he takes the role of a detective and offers some side quests revolving around solving mysteries. EMR demos. You might have noticed that this one is plural in parentheses, and that's because there have been a few demos of Rebrushed leading up to its final release. You're probably aware of the free demo that you can play on all the platforms that Rebrushed is on, but there was also some playable demos available at D23 and Gamescom before this. However, these demos were just the same as the one available to play for everyone, so thankfully we don't have to worry about losing early demos of the game or anything like that. Tier 2. We are now moving on to Tier 2 of the iceberg, which is where we move away from the very basic features of Epic Mickey and start to look at more specific ideas regarding the game, the development history of the game, and more. EM2 prototypes. In 2020, several prototype builds of Epic Mickey 2 surfaced online thanks to someone who bought a Wii development kit and found them left over in the files of it. There are a total of 8 builds called banks that can be downloaded and played using Dolphin Emulator. The dates of these builds range from July 2011 to March 2012, and some of them are more or less finished. These banks are absolutely chock full of cool discoveries, and I could make dozens of videos just about the prototypes and what they have in them. But we have to keep things moving, so let's look at the next entry. Digicomics app. This one ties in with the next 2 entries. The Digicomics app, also sometimes just referred to as the Epic Mickey app, was an iOS app released to promote the first Epic Mickey game. In this app, you could read the Tales of Wasteland comics and the Epic Mickey graphic novel, and you could look at a pre-Thinner Disaster map of Wasteland, as well as watch some trailers for the main game. Of course, this app is no longer available on the App Store, but in December 2023, some assets for the app were found in a leak of Apple's test flight servers. Epic Mickey graphic novel. The Epic Mickey graphic novel is a retelling of the story of the first Epic Mickey game as, well, a graphic novel. It is 64 pages long and is sometimes used by fans to confirm or deconfirm whether or not certain events are canon, such as whether Mickey did the paint path or thinner path for a given event. However, there are some events that are missing or different from the original game. For example, Mickey frees Gus in Dark Beauty Castle, which does actually line up with some early versions of the game, but of course this is not what happens in the final game. The graphic novel was only available digitally on the Digicomics app, as I mentioned previously, and on a website called Comixology, but that doesn't really exist anymore, so there's no way to actually legitimately read the graphic novel. However, scans of every page are... hold on, I'm gonna answer this real quick. Hey man, what's up?
Hey, I know you're kind of editing a video, but did you hear the news?
No, what's going on?
You know those people who make their Mickey comic compilations, Fantagraphics?
Yeah, I've heard of them.
Well, they just announced the Epic Mickey Comics collection. It's going to be a hardcover release of the Epic Mickey graphic novel, the first English release of the Epic Mickey 2 graphic novel, and the Tales of Wasteland comics. It's actually up for pre-order on Amazon right now. It's going to come out on the 13th of May next year for $30 US. Also, for some reason it made it to #1 in Rabbit Pet Care on Amazon.
Oh, well, sweet, thanks for letting me know. Perfect timing, too.
Yep, no problem. See you later.
Alright, well, I'll see you around. Well, wouldn't you know? Anyway, there was also originally plans to release both softcover and hardcover physical editions of the graphic novel, but that never came to fruition. Well, until now, of course. But the illustrations in this comic are so amazingly well done, and I would really recommend giving it a read-through. Tales of Wasteland. Moving on to even more Epic Mickey comics, the Tales of Wasteland are a series of comics that are meant to take place before the events of the Epic Mickey games. These comics were done by Marvel and were then published by Disney. There are a total of 6 Tales of Wasteland comics, and they were available digitally by purchasing them through the Digicomics app, and unlike the graphic novel, did see physical releases in some countries outside the United States. These comics are noteworthy because, like I said earlier, they take place before the events of Epic Mickey, which means that we get to see what Wasteland and the characters in it were like before the Thinner Disaster and the Blot Wars. Oswald Blot. This one I could have included as part of the Donnie Hamilton concept art in Tier 1, but it's very unique and has its own story to it. There's a good chance that you've seen some pieces of concept art depicting a fusion between the Blot and Oswald. They're very cool and all, but for some reason the community thought that this was canon because of a voice line from Abe in Epic Mickey 2. I'm not going to spend much more time on this one because I have a separate video about this Oswald Blot, so if you're interested in this story then just go watch that instead because we gotta keep moving. Early EM remake rumors. In 2020 and 2021, years before Rebrushed was announced, there were rumors that a remake for EM1 was in development. However, we now know that the details surrounding this rumor never ended up being true, even though we did end up getting Rebrushed. If I remember correctly, this rumor started after someone's LinkedIn page was found to have a vague mention of a remake of a Disney IP. The rumor also stated that a studio called Playmagic was behind the development of the remake, but obviously Rebrushed ended up being developed by Purple Lamp. But what killed this rumor was the fact that the remake mentioned on the LinkedIn page ended up just being a remake for Stubbs the Zombie, not Epic Mickey. I just think this is cool to look back on because I remember saying that there's no way they would ever do an Epic Mickey remake, and look at where we are now. Epic Mickey 3. You know it wouldn't be an Epic Mickey Iceberg without Epic Mickey 3 being mentioned eventually. Epic Mickey 3 was of course never released since Junction Point closed in 2013 after EM2 released, but we do know that it was actually in early stages of development. It seems like it didn't get very far past the concept phase, but we do have some surviving pieces of concept art made for the game. The plot of this game probably would have revolved around the Pete's, as is teased at the end of Epic Mickey 2. It would have also probably gone even farther with the whole musical thing that Epic Mickey 2 had, according to Warren Spector. And now that Rebrushed is out, who knows, maybe Epic Mickey 3 is actually possible now. Epic Donald. Epic Donald is the name of a scrapped Epic Mickey spin-off game and has a lot more to it than I could possibly go into in this video. This game was being developed by Junction Point, and unlike Epic Mickey 3, Epic Donald actually got decently far into development. Instead of Mickey, the game would have revolved around Donald, who could travel through time to reveal secrets and change the world around him, similar to Mickey's brush. This game also would have had a playstyle matters type of story to it, and quests could be solved in multiple different ways. In recent years, some commentated development footage of the game has surfaced and show us just how far this game got into development. It's really a shame that this game ended up being cancelled because the ideas shown in these videos are actually pretty creative and clever. Oswald was traded for a human being. This entry is referring to the story about how Disney got the rights to Oswald back from Universal. Like I explained in Tier 1, Oswald was under the ownership of Universal for a long time, but in 2006 Disney managed to get the rights to Oswald back by trading his trademark for a sports commentator named Al Michaels. Obviously not like slavery, but from then on Al Michaels would be working under Universal, and Oswald would be back under Disney's ownership. So yeah, you could in fact say that Oswald was traded for a human being. Cut enemies. As I'm sure you realize by now, the Epic Mickey games have had a ton of scrapped content, and there are also some enemies that never ended up making it into the final games too. For one, the drop wing that appears in Epic Mickey 2 was planned to be in the first game, but with a completely different design. Another enemy scrapped from EM1 was the Lifter, which was a type of beetleworks that would grab Mickey and throw him off of cliffs. It ended up being scrapped because of memory limitations and because apparently they weren't fun to deal with. In EM1, a variation of the Tanker beetleworks with the body of Mickey's car and the head of Hades from Hercules was scrapped as well. This Hades tanker, as it's called, can also be seen in some screenshots of the Game Informer demo, which is something we'll get into later. But the Hades tanker did eventually appear in the final version of EM2, so don't worry, he got his chance to shine. EM2 original plot. One of the biggest criticisms on EM2 is the story, but it turns out that the story was originally going to be much different from the one we ended up getting. Basically, Mickey would have been kidnapped by the Mad Doctor again, and the Blot's ink that was left in Mickey would have been extracted from him to revive the Blot. Mickey would have had to destroy his own heart to defeat the Blot, but Yen Sid would have given him a new heart as he was impressed with Mickey's sacrifice. Yen Sid would have also given Oswald a heart, but Oswald would have just chosen to stay in Wasteland. There was also going to be a subplot in Adventureland about a war between Captain Hook and Blackbeard, and a new version of Pete called Pirate Pete was going to be involved. There are even some assets related to Pirate Pete, including a model and texture from one of the EM2 prototypes. But at the end of the day, this whole plot was scrapped because of time constraints and because the story had to be opened up for a sequel, according to Chase Jones. EM takes place in 2010. This refers to a theory that the first Epic Mickey game takes place in the year 2010, the same year that the game was released. Since Epic Mickey has a pretty meta story, considering how it's a Disney game about Disney media, it's kind of hard to put a pin on exactly when everything in the EM universe takes place. But according to Chase Jones, there isn't a specific time period or year where the events of Epic Mickey take place. Obviously, it would have to take place after all the cartoons mentioned in the game released, but other than that, there's really no way of knowing. But in the intro cutscene, you can see the calendar says November 18th just before Mickey gets dragged into Wasteland. So we do have that, I guess. Hero and Scrapper Mickey. Out of everything that was scrapped from Epic Mickey, Scrapper and Hero Mickey seem to be the most beloved all across the board. In the Game Informer magazine issue 199, it is explained that through the player's actions, Mickey's appearance and animations would change to either align with Hero Mickey or Scrapper Mickey. Hero Mickey had brighter colors and yellow gloves, and if the player consistently made good or paint path choices, Mickey would start to turn into Hero Mickey. Conversely, Scrapper Mickey would have darker colors and would have a more rabid, savage savage look, and if the player consistently made bad or thinner path choices, then Mickey would turn into Scrapper Mickey. It's a cool idea, but honestly, I don't think it was that cool. Like, Epic Mickey already has a big problem with its morality system in that nothing is morally gray, and one choice is almost always the obviously right choice. And Scrapper and Hero Mickey would have just made this issue worse in my opinion. Maybe that deserves a video of its own, but for now you can trash me in the comments for my opinion if you want. Epic Mickey 2 Rebrushed. Now that Epic Mickey Rebrushed is out and we've had our fun, everyone is asking where Epic Mickey 2 Rebrushed is at. It seems that Purple Lamp's next plan is to remake EM2 according to an interview where they said they were just waiting for the green light from Disney to get started. Also, Purple Lamp, if you're watching this by chance, please don't remake EM2 because it is beyond saving. But all in all, the possibilities for a remake of EM2 are greater than ever right now. EM's canon endings. Because of the playstyle matters type of storytelling Epic Mickey has, one player's playthrough could be entirely different from someone else's playthrough, which means that it can get confusing on whether or not there's a canon decision for each event in the game. But through Epic Mickey 2, the novelization, the graphic novel, etc., we're able to piece together a canon story for the game. I have a separate video going through what the canon path is for some events in the first game, so go check that out too. EM2 and EMPOI poor reception. This one is pretty simple, it's just referring to the fact that both Epic Mickey 2 and Epic Mickey Power of Illusion were not very well received. Epic Mickey 2 was criticized for having a predictable story, Oswald's AI being stupid, and a variety of other things. As for Power of Illusion, it wasn't as heavily criticized as EM2, but most of the negative reception around the game revolves around the game's extremely short length and the painting mechanic being really slow and repetitive, which is kind of sad since the painting mechanic is basically the entire main mechanic of the game. All MJM merch is real. Mickey Junk Mountain is packed with Mickey merchandise, from books to toys to dolls, and all of the Mickey merchandise here is in fact from the real world. Almost all of the merchandise can be identified and traced back to their origins, but it's evident that the developers might have taken a little bit of creative freedom for their Epic Mickey appearances. Or maybe we're just looking at the wrong stuff, who knows. Toons is self-aware. This entry is referring to the fact that all of the Toons in Wasteland are aware of the fact that they're forgotten cartoon characters. For example, when you meet Horace and Clarabelle, they show Mickey pictures of cartoons that they starred in, and even Mickey is unable to remember them. Honestly, it's pretty sad that all the Toons have to live in Wasteland knowing full damn well that they're just cartoon characters that nobody even cares about anymore. Abe's original design. Abe is a character found in the train tunnels in Epic Mickey 2, and he's completely original to EM2. However, through the prototypes of EM2, we can learn that Abe was going to be an animatronic Abraham Lincoln in reference to a show at Disneyland called Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. I'm sure you can see where the name Abe comes from now, right? Anyway, this show opened in 1964, but it closed only a few short months later. Walt Disney actually looked up to Abraham Lincoln a lot throughout his life, and it would have been a nice homage to that to have the former president included in EM2. Even in the game files, Abe is referred to as Lincoln Animatronic. But of course, Abe would get the design he has today, because according to a level designer who worked on the game, Disney didn't want the Hall of Presidents represented in such a way. Even though this version of Abraham Lincoln isn't from the Hall of Presidents, but whatever. Also, I guess it would be kind of inappropriate to be able to dismantle and basically kill an animatronic Abraham Lincoln because of, well, you know. Bog Easy name origin. This one is pretty quick. Bog Easy is based off of New Orleans Square at Disneyland, and a nickname that the city of New Orleans has is the Big Easy. So basically, Big Easy, Bog Easy, yeah, you probably get it. Cut content from Epic Mickey was reused in Epic Mickey Rebrushed. This one speaks for itself. Some things that were scrapped from the original Epic Mickey game ended up being re-implemented back into Rebrushed. Most of it is pretty small stuff, like the design for the brush seems to have been taken from the one seen in the Game Informer demo, and some animations that weren't used in the original game, like Mickey shaking his butt as seen in a demo animation reel, ended up being reused and rebrushed. Epic Oswald. Epic Oswald was the name of an unofficial fan game that was in development by the now defunct Epic team, and it would have been a prequel to the first Epic Mickey game centered around Oswald. The idea was concepted in 2018 where it was going to be a 3D platformer made in Unreal Engine 4. Development on this version didn't get very far, but in 2022 the idea for Epic Oswald 2D was created, which would have turned the game into a 2D puzzle platformer, hence the name. Epic Oswald 2D got much farther in development, but of course it was ultimately cancelled. I myself actually had some part in development in the game, as I got to see all the progress that was made on it firsthand. It's a shame that the project never came to fruition because I was pretty proud of the progress that my friends had made on it. Japanese version of EM. If you have played the first Epic Mickey game on the Wii, then chances are you either played the NTSC or PAL version of the game, or the North American and European versions respectively. But the JP or Japanese version of the game is actually quite a bit different than the one the rest of the world got. The Japanese version wouldn't release until almost a year after the North American and European versions in August of 2011, and Nintendo themselves stepped in to assist in this localized version. The most notable and most apparent difference is that the game is overall brighter in pretty much every aspect. Even the cover of the game has brighter and more vibrant colors. The camera is also a bit different and is overall more quick and responsive, which was done to address one of the game's biggest criticisms. There's a lot more smaller differences, and there could be an entire video going over all these differences, but for now we're just going to move on. EM2 troubled development. This entry is just referring to the fact that Epic Mickey 2 had a very stressful development cycle. There's a really good book called Press Reset that goes into much more detail about EM2's development than I can here, but basically Disney refused to give Junction Point any more time to work on the game, so they had to rush the game to get it out by November of 2012. Junction Point was also given instructions to make the game multi-platform, which is a good thing, don't get me wrong, but for the developers it only added more stress. In the end, when the game finally came out, it was evident just through the game itself that it was rushed, and it would end up receiving mostly mixed reviews. 2007 pitch demo. In 2007, a short video was created to show off some concepts behind Epic Mickey. This pitch demo looks completely different than the Epic Mickey we have today. From Mickey having a different design to Mickey using ink from his own body to fight blotlings instead of using a brush. Mickey could also use some of his ink to create tools for himself, which is probably where the idea for the sketches came from. But the main concept of Wasteland the Blot and the game being about forgotten Disney characters is still present. Jamface replaced Marcus. In EM1, Gremlin Marcus is the gremlin that Mickey often returns to for help with the projectors. But in EM2, Marcus is completely absent, and in his place is a gremlin named Jamface. This is all well and good, but there's actually a lot more to this than you might think. In Dark Beauty Castle in EM2, you can interact with a table, and Gus will tell you that Marcus got stuck under this table and had to be placed on medical leave, which is the canon reason as to why Jamface replaces Marcus in the game. But there's a rumor that Gremlin Marcus was named after someone at Junction Point who worked on EM1 but left the team during the development of EM2. So they got rid of Gremlin Marcus in EM2 and then apparently decided to make a canon that he almost died to a table. I should also mention that Gremlin Jamface in some of the EM2 prototypes is in fact named Gremlin Marcus, which might give this rumor a bit more credibility. Secret room in Mickey Junk Mountain. In Oswald's Sanctuary in Epic Mickey 1 and Epic Mickey Rebrushed, you can thin out the floor to reveal a tunnel with a locked gate at the end. If you got Gilda's axe from the previous area, then you can sacrifice the axe to wedge open the gate and gain entry to a secret room. In this room are miniature recreations of the main areas in the game, such as Mean Street, Gremlin Village, and Skull Island. Most prominently, however, is a giant Mickey toy with the Sorcerer's Apprentice costume holding a giant bottle. Thinning out this Mickey toy will cause the bottle to drop into the thinner below, and the thinner will rise and flood the entire room. The implications of this room are very interesting, especially considering that it's inside Oswald's Sanctuary. EMR 100% secret. In Epic Mickey Rebrushed, getting every piece of concept art and every pin can be a big challenge, but if you manage to get everything, then upon returning to Main Street, you'll discover that there's a fireworks show happening at Dark Beauty Castle in the background. It's a very tasteful and well done Easter egg, and I also made a separate short video about this Easter egg, so go check that out if you want to. Tier 3. Now we're moving on to Tier 3 of the iceberg, and this is where things start to actually become obscure, even if you consider yourself an Epic Mickey fan. We're going to look at things that, in order to know about, you probably have to have actually played the games for yourself, rather than just hearing about it somewhere on the internet. And not only that, but you might also have to do some of your own research outside the games. Let's begin. EMR leaks. This one is a pretty big one, but also one of the coolest entries here in my opinion. The short version of the story is that on the same day EMR was announced, a random Discord account joined the Function Point Discord server and started sending footage and screenshots from early builds of the game. Across the next few days, there ended up being around 30 videos sent by this Discord user, along with a slew of screenshots, and all of them were eventually uploaded to the Internet Archive. We'll go into some more specifics about these leaked later in the iceberg though. EM2 leaks. I don't think this entry is referring to the EM2 prototypes, but rather the fact that some information about EM2 was leaked before the game came out. A survey about some cover art for EM2 was leaked, but we'll get more in depth on that later. And then a few months after that, a newsletter from Disney themselves was leaked onto a now defunct website called Stitch Kingdom that had details about EM2 such as the game was going to be co-op and multi-platform. So now, at this point in the iceberg, we know that EM1 had leaks with the dark concept art and stuff, EM2 had leaks with the survey and the newsletter, and Rebrushed had leaked footage of early development builds. So apparently Epic Mickey is just cursed to get leaked in some way, I guess. Mickey's Melodrammer. In the intro to Clarabelle cutscene that plays when Mickey visits Oztown for the first time in EM1 or EMR, Clarabelle mentions a cartoon called Mickey's Melodrammer. This cartoon was released in 1933 and it's noteworthy because it actually contained a very racist scene of Mickey doing blackface. It's just crazy to me that this cartoon is mentioned by name in Epic Mickey considering how inappropriate of a scene it has, especially in EMR because that scene is very much looked down upon in more modern contexts. World War II Mickey cartoons. To preface this entry, I put this one on here myself as a replacement for an entry at the very bottom of the iceberg called Adolf Hitler is canon to Epic Mickey, so that should start us off on a good step. Anyway, during World War II, there was a couple of Disney cartoons created as anti-Nazi propaganda. Some of these cartoons include Out of the Frying Pan and Into the Fryer or Darth Fuhrer's Face, which is probably the most well-known of these World War II cartoons. So why is this on the iceberg and what does it have to do with Epic Mickey? Well, even though these cartoons aren't mentioned at all in the games themselves, it is entirely possible that these cartoons and certain things within them could be in Wasteland, especially given the time frame as these cartoons were created between 1941 and 1945. And if these cartoons are in Wasteland, then it would also mean that the literal depictions of Adolf Hitler present in them would be in Wasteland too, which would ultimately make Adolf Hitler canon to Epic Mickey. So maybe think about that next time you decide to play the game. Wonderland being cut from all EM games. This one is pretty self-explanatory, but yes, Wonderland was cut from every single EM game. It was cut from EM1, but it didn't make it past the concept phase and seems to have been scrapped pretty early in development. As for EM2, Wonderland seems to have gotten a little farther in development, and it would also seem that some assets were moved to the float yard. Something that's kinda cool is that in the Epic Mickey art book, which was released right in the middle of EM2's development, a quote says, "But who knows what the future may hold," in reference to Wonderland, which could be interpreted as more evidence that Wonderland was planned for EM2. Even in Power of Illusion, Wonderland got scrapped, but similarly to EM1, it didn't get past the concept phase. Despite this, the Queen of Hearts had an appearance on the cover of the game, even though she's not even in the game at all, but later prints of the game replaced her with the Mad Hatter. Rebrushed, on the other hand, is a different story. Wonderland and Rebrushed got pretty far into development, and we have the most tangible evidence for that compared to the other games, as is shown in some of the leak videos. There were multiple different areas such as Tugley Wood, the maze, and a giant room that would become accessible after Mickey eats a mushroom and shrinks down. Besides the leak videos, there is also some things from Wonderland left over in the game's files, including early versions of music for the area, quest data, and some sound effects for a supposed caterpillar boss fight. But I guess Wonderland and Epic Mickey just wasn't meant to be. Cartoon World. The Cartoon World is the name of the world where all of the remembered cartoon characters live outside Wasteland, including Mickey. Basically, Wasteland is the place for forgotten and unpopular characters, and the Cartoon World is for all the popular and memorable characters. Most mentions of the Cartoon World are in Epic Mickey 2, where the Mad Doctor tries to use a TV show to give him a heart and allow him to return to the Cartoon World. There is also a scrapped mechanic in EM2 that would allow you to leave Wasteland and return to the Cartoon World, and the Cartoon World would have also likely played a much bigger role in EM3. Hot Topic t-shirts. In 2020, several Epic Mickey shirts were announced and released to Hot Topic, which is a store chain that sells pop culture merchandise and home to the exact kinds of people you don't really want to meet. This was a very notable incident to fans because it had been years since any official Epic Mickey news, and these shirts just kinda came out of nowhere. The release of these shirts sparked some speculation among fans that there were plans for another installment to the series, but at this point I don't think Rebrushed was actually in development yet. Blackbeard. I'm not going to restate everything I said earlier, but like I said in the previous tier, Blackbeard was going to be an important character as part of a subplot for the scrapped EM2 plot. Blackbeard is actually mentioned by name by some pirate NPCs in EM2, and it's possible that he was responsible for Captain Hook's disappearance, but other than that, Blackbeard is completely absent from the series. Epic Mickey Timeline. So like I mentioned earlier, there's not an exact timeline for when the events of the Epic Mickey games themselves take place. However, it is possible to create a timeline of when all of the cartoons and merchandise that appear in the games came to be. So I think that's what this entry is talking about. The timeline would have to start all the way back in 1871, as that's when Alice Through the Looking Glass was published. Then it would continue from there. Trolley Troubles released in 1927, Steamboat Willie released in 1928, The Mad Doctor cartoon released in 1933, etc. Function Point. Hey, look at that, I didn't even put this one on here myself. Function Point is a YouTube channel and Discord server that started in 2023, and if you've been to my channel, you've probably heard of it before, as I'm a part of it myself. Our first project together was Epic Mickey Awesome Edition, which nicely leads us into the next entry. Epic Mickey Awesome Edition. Epic Mickey Awesome Edition is the first full Epic Mickey hack, and saw an initial 1.0 release in March of 2022 where it was made entirely by me, but this version sucked. So after the 1.0 release, Function Point was formed to work on version 2.0, which is probably the version that you're familiar with if you've heard of Awesome Edition before, and V2.5 was released in August of 2023. What's kind of ironic is that there is actually an entire Iceberg video about Epic Mickey Awesome Edition, so be sure to check that out too. Animatronic Pluto. In the Epic Mickey games, you can see animatronic versions of Mickey's friends, including Goofy, Daisy, and Donald, but an animatronic version of Pluto isn't even mentioned. There are a couple of references to Pluto in the games, like for example his food bowl is in Mickey's house in Oztown, but again, no animatronic Pluto. However, Warren Spector hinted at animatronic versions of Pluto, Donald, and maybe even Minnie in a 2009 interview, where he said that they were going to, quote, bring them back but in a slightly different form. Oswald is a lonely guy, and so he's created his own versions of Mickey's family, which is the canon reason for the existence of animatronic Goofy, Daisy, and Donald, so this seems like pretty good evidence that animatronic Pluto and Minnie were planned to be in the game alongside Mickey's other friends. Hidden Gus dialogue in Tortuga. In EM1 in Tortuga, you can do a precise jump to get out of bounds and on top of the sail containing Beluga Billy's treasure, which is already pretty cool. But what turns this whole thing on its head is that if you walk around a certain spot here, Gus will have some dialogue about a password that's never seen anywhere else in the game. And if you do this out of bounds trick in the second visit of Tortuga after you get back from the jungle, then Gus will ominously say "Dead men tell no tales," and the gate to Pirate Voyage will swing open, after which Gus will say "Worked as promised, let's head through." By putting the pieces together, it would seem that you were originally supposed to open the gate to Pirate Voyage by learning a password, the password in question being "Dead men tell no tales." Out of context though, it's honestly kinda creepy. Epic Mickey Movie. Along with all the cancelled games the Epic Mickey series has seen, there is also a pitch for an Epic Mickey movie created by Warren Spector himself. According to a Reddit comment from Warren, he had a budget and a team lined up to make an Epic Mickey movie and even a pitch trailer that was shown to Disney, but they didn't seem interested. Although the pitch trailer in its entirety has never surfaced online, there are some demo reels from portfolios of people who worked on it that include some short clips from the trailer. Disney probably wasn't willing to take the risk of making a movie adaptation of a new video game series that had just came out, and this Epic Mickey movie never came to light. EMR music issues. One of the biggest issues with EMR among fans is the inconsistencies between the different songs in the game. Most notably, when the game came out, all 5 Bog Easy tracks were completely missing from the game files, and the Lonesome Manor music played all throughout Bog Easy instead. Similarly, in Oswald's Sanctuary, it would just play the Mickey Jug Mountain music, even though it was supposed to play Oswald's theme. Thankfully, both of these issues were fixed in an October patch. However, this patch did not fix other issues with the music, and pretty much every area in the game has some issues with the music. Sometimes the dark layers will play when the light layers are supposed to play, or vice versa. Sometimes the neutral dark or neutral light layers will get mixed up with each other, etc. The most annoying part about it is that these music issues are inconsistent between each area of the game. As of the writing of this script, most of the music issues have not been resolved, but I hope that there will be another patch to fully address them. Oswald has 420 kids. I know that sounds like a joke because of the funny weed number, but it is canon to the Epic Mickey universe. In one of the Tales of Wasteland comics that I mentioned earlier, Oswald tells Hortensia to gather all 420 of their bunny children to build a tower up to a hole in the sky. Whether or not this number was deliberately chosen to reference smoking weed is up to you, I guess. Toons can die. This is an idea that toons, both in Wasteland and in the cartoon world, can die. As far as Epic Mickey goes, Horace mentions in a piece of dialogue that Constance Hatchaway had several husbands that expired, an obvious implication to the fact that she straight up murdered all of her husbands. In the scrapped EM2 plot that I talked about earlier, I left out the fact that Prescott was also going to die, but we'll get to that later. Japanese censorship of EM. As I explained earlier, the Japanese version of EM1 has some notable differences from the version other countries got. One of these differences I left out to save until now was that the intro to Mean Street cutscene is almost completely different. You're probably familiar with the version of the intro to Mean Street cutscene that has a giant wave of thinner splashing all over Wasteland, not unlike a tsunami. Unfortunately, only a few months before the JP version of the game was released, the most devastating tsunami in Japan's history happened and kinda screwed things up. So this cutscene was censored and the thinner wave was replaced with this weird thinner gas. And to address the elephant in the room, yeah, it does look like farts. There's even a new shot of Dark Beauty Castle succumbing to the thinner gas. What makes this even more interesting is the fact that this censored cutscene was used in Rebrushed, instead of the version with the thinner wave that most people remember. I assume this is the case because it seems that Purple Lamp used the Japanese version of EM1 as reference more than the NTSC or PAL versions of the game. EM novelization. Not to be confused with the EM graphic novel or the Tales of Wasteland comics, the EM novelization is another retelling of EM1's story. The novel was written by author Carly Jablonski, and similar to the graphic novel, some events are a little bit different than the actual game, and some events are just left out entirely. Despite this, some fans use this novel as evidence for what's canon or not canon to the games, again similarly to the graphic novel. Shadow Blot Skip. The Shadow Blot Skip is a glitch in EM1 that lets you completely skip the Shadow Blob fight, hence the name, and requires some specific choices throughout your playthrough. First, you have to either jam or ignore the pumps on Skull Island, and then play music for the pipe organ in the Lonesome Manor. After this, start the Bog Easy Bell quest and go straight to Ventureland and buy the piece of the bell in Tiki Sam's shop. After this, for some reason, upon trying to return to Mean Street, you'll find that the Bloticles are now attacking Wasteland, which means that you just skipped having to go to Mickey Jug Mountain to meet Oswald, the Shadow Blot fight, and the Oztown Bloticles infestation. And if that's not already crazy enough, trying to go back to Oztown after this will completely hardlock your game and force you to delete your save file. Because of how weird the setup for this glitch is, some players encountered this glitch completely on accident, myself included. Thankfully, this glitch was patched in the JP version of the game, and it doesn't work in Rebrushed either. Steam version of EM2. You're probably aware of the Steam port of EM2, and so you're probably wondering, why is this entry this far down on the iceberg? Well, the Steam version of EM2 has a pretty cool history behind it, and it's a miracle that it even came out in the first place, which is why it's on the iceberg. For one, the Steam version was released over a year after Junction Point had shut down, and beyond that, years after its release, it would get several patches as well. Two of these patches came out in 2021 and aimed to address some hardware compatibility issues, and the third and final patch dropped in 2022 and added support for a slew of new languages. PS Vita version of EM2. Now we're going to move on from the Steam port of EM2 to the PS Vita port. The PS Vita version of EM2 is probably the most unique version of the game since it has some new features, such as touch controls and co-op between two different consoles over Wi-Fi. But it's also the most obscure version and the hardest to get your hands on. I mean, it's a failed game on a failed console, so I guess that's not really a huge surprise. EMR Collector's Edition controversy. This entry could be referring to a few different things, but I'll explain all of them. The Epic Mickey Rebrushed Collector's Edition, along with the release date for the game, were actually leaked, which forced THQ Nordic to release the Collector's Edition trailer earlier than they had intended. After this, the Collector's Edition was only limited to 5,000 copies, and they sold out entirely within the day it was announced. And most frustratingly of all, the Collector's Edition was shipped out to Europe a full week before the release date of the game, meaning that people were playing the game and uploading footage of it way before anyone else could. I mean, the Collector's Edition has some cool stuff in it, I'm glad to have it and everything, but Hortensia's Origins. This one might surprise you if you haven't heard of it before. Every character and every piece of merchandise in Epic Mickey is presented as being a real part of Disney's history, including Oswald's girlfriend Hortensia. But according to Warren Spector, Hortensia was completely made up for Epic Mickey and didn't even exist at all in Disney's history up until then. I assume they came up with Hortensia because her and Oswald's names both start with O, like how Mickey and Minnie's names both start with an M. In some of the Oswald cartoons, Oswald had a few different love interests such as Fanny Cottontail and Sadie, the latter of which has a much stronger resemblance to Hortensia. But yeah, Hortensia was just a completely made-up character for Epic Mickey. EM and EMR ending cutscene inconsistencies. I have a short video about this one as well, so I'll explain this one quickly. In the ending cutscene for EM1, there are some inconsistencies from the rest of the game, such as every gremlin having a mustache and bowler cap like Gus, the ghost not having shadows sometimes, and Smee's design being wrong. But what's crazy is that these same inconsistencies were carried over into the ending cutscene for Rebrushed as well. Epic Disney Racers. Epic Disney Racers is the name of a cancelled Epic Mickey spin-off game that was going to be a racing game. The game didn't get very far into development as it was only in the concept phase before it got cancelled when Junction Point shut down. We do have a few pieces of concept art that were made for the game, and most of the information we have about the game is just what can be extrapolated from them. It seems that the game would have included characters not seen in the other Epic Mickey games like Scrooge McDuck and his three nephews, but in this case it's possible that they were to be included because of Epic Donald. Game Informer Demo. The Game Informer demo is a whole rabbit hole that deserves several videos, but I'll try to keep it condensed here. The Game Informer demo is the name given to a specific early build of the first Epic Mickey game that was created for the purpose of being covered in the gaming magazine Game Informer. However, this build wasn't actually entirely playable, and instead some videos were created by Junction Point, which were then shown to Game Informer writers to make a section on in issue 199. It looks entirely different from the Epic Mickey we ended up getting, and had some scrapped mechanics that never ended up in the final version, such as Scrapper and Hero Mickey. There are quite a few screenshots from this demo and even some assets that have surfaced over the years, but we've never gotten the actual build of the demo, and to be honest, we probably never will. Lonesome Manor is based off of all versions of the Haunted Mansion. This one pretty much speaks for itself. It's just saying that different parts of the Lonesome Manor are based on different versions of the Haunted Mansion ride, such as the one from Disneyland in California or Disneyland Paris. EM is canon to the MCU. This one is kind of a fun one. It doesn't have much actual evidence behind it, but it's still fun to think about. In some recent Marvel media, there have been a couple of Oswald cameos, such as in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness or The Loki Show. However, this doesn't necessarily tie into Epic Mickey, and it's really just Disney trying to reference Oswald. Spirit of Wasteland. The Spirit of Wasteland is a character in Epic Mickey 2 that essentially defines the different attributes of Wasteland and its inhabitants. He gives you a quest in Mean Street North that allows the player to unlock different spirits based on what pins they get throughout their playthrough. I think this entry is on the iceberg because of his appearance, in that some people don't know what he's based off of, but it's most likely based off of a 1950 Disney short called The Brave Engineer. Tier 4. Now we're moving on to Tier 4 of the iceberg, which has some very cool entries to talk about. Most of the entries here aren't really usually talked about in the Epic Mickey community, let alone outside of it, and are all around just really cool. Fanny Cottontail and Julius were cut from EM. In the original Oswald cartoons, one of Oswald's love interests was another rabbit named Fanny Cottontail, and in the Alice comedy series from the 1920s, a cat named Julius was a recurring character who acted as a sort of sidekick to Alice. And there is some evidence that both of these characters were once planned for the Epic Mickey series. Some concept art depicts Fanny with Oswald rather than Hortensia, and she was intended to appear in a scrapped game called Epic History that we'll talk more about later. As for Julius, there are some drawings made during the development of Epic History depicting a character that does have a resemblance to Julius, but we don't know for sure if this is actually supposed to be him or not. Prescott was going to die in EM2. This is one that I hinted at before, and now we're finally ready to talk about it. As part of the scrapped EM2 plot, Prescott was actually going to fall to his death, and according to Adam Fenton, an artist for the game, the red button seen on Prescott's glove was intended to be used for a self-destruct joke that didn't make it into the final script. So they were getting pretty clever on how they were going to kill him off, I guess. Warren throwing incident. This is another one that I have a full video about, so go check that out for the whole story. But during EM2's development, Warren Spector had a meeting with some Disney higher-ups, and during this meeting, Warren got so upset that he threw a remote at the wall and stormed out of the room. This rare story was detailed in the Press Reset book that I mentioned earlier, and it's a really crazy story that doesn't get talked about enough. EM takes place in the Who Framed Roger Rabbit universe. This is a fan theory that states that the Epic Mickey universe takes place within the universe of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, a half live-action, half-animated movie from 1988. Most of the evidence is about simple stuff, like the fact that cartoon characters are called toons in both medias, but the most interesting part behind this theory is that, mechanically speaking, Thinner behaves quite similarly to the dip, which is a substance from Who Framed Roger Rabbit. The dip is basically a green acid that's able to dissolve toons completely, just like how Thinner is a green acid that's able to melt toon characters and dissolve toon objects. Furthermore, it's said in the movie that the dip is a mixture of turpentine, acetone, and benzene, all of which are solvents either used as substitutes for or are main components of paint thinners. See where it's going now? Well, unfortunately, that's pretty much where the theory ends, so make of all that what you will. Original EM remaster and ports. This entry is pretty simple in itself, saying that there have been multiple rumors about an EM1 remaster or remake, but also that there were plans to port the game to PC, PS3, Xbox 360, and iPad, the latter of which we'll get to later. According to Warren Spector in an interview from 2008, the game was once intended to only be on PC, PS3, and Xbox 360, until they got an idea to make a port for the Wii as well. Initially, Warren said that a lot of the mechanics and design for the game wouldn't work on the Wii, but eventually he was convinced that the game could be a Wii exclusive instead, which is of course what they ended up going with. I personally think that the game works very well on the Wii, but it is disappointing to know that players on other platforms never got the chance to play the game. Disney Parks promotion of EMR. Leading up to EMR's release, there were some advertisements for the game at the Disney parks. I could only find one picture of one of these ads, but hey, it's still pretty cool to see. Unlucky Luchas. Unlucky Luchas is the name of an animated short featuring Mickey and Oswald that never ended up being officially released. In 2020, Jim Dooley uploaded 5 songs called Unlucky Luchas Parts 1 through 5, and nobody really knew what they were, not even Jim himself. But in 2024, we discovered a demo reel from someone who used to work at Junction Point that contained 2 clips from a 3D CGI short showing Mickey and Oswald training in a gym, and then the two wrestling Big Bad Pete and the Big Bad Wolf. And during those clips, Unlucky Luchas Parts 2 and 4 from Jim Dooley's channel was playing, which finally meant we knew what the songs were for and also the name of the short. Later the same year, another demo reel from an ex-Powerhouse employee was discovered, Powerhouse being the company that did the 2D animations for the Epic Mickey games. And interestingly, this demo reel contained a 3-second clip of the same scene from the other demo reel, but in 2D. So maybe the Unlucky Luchas short was originally going to be in 2D, but they decided to switch to 3D, or vice versa. Anyway, when the short was discovered, it kind of blew up on Twitter and people were sharing it around everywhere. It was pretty nice to see. The Blot is still alive. This entry is referring to a fan theory and isn't necessarily canon. I just thought I should mention that. But anyway, at the end of EM1, the post-credits cutscene shows that Mickey still has the blot within him, which was probably supposed to connect to EM2's original scrapped plot that I talked about earlier. So basically, since the old plot never came to fruition, this teaser cutscene doesn't matter at all. Anyway, besides that, you can thin out part of the cinema in Mean Street North to reveal the blot's face, which is just a cool Easter egg, but I guess this could be interpreted as a sort of warning from the blot itself and that it's still alive. Cut moves. Mickey might not have a very expansive moveset in the Epic Mickey games, especially in EM1, but some pieces of concept art show off some pretty cool ideas for abilities Mickey could have had. We can see Mickey using the brush like a rifle, a bow and arrow, a javelin, or a boomerang. Of course, these are all just ideas, and considering how many of these move ideas there are, these might not have necessarily been planned to actually be in the game at all. Black Pete. When Jim Dooley uploaded all of the Epic Mickey music, he uploaded a new song that wasn't in the game called Outro Black Pete. It turns out that Black Pete is just the name used for Big Bad Pete in the files of EM1, so he wasn't going to be a new variant of Pete or anything like that. As far as the song goes, Jim Dooley doesn't know what it was going to be used for, so all we can assume is that it was going to be used for Big Bad Pete, but it ended up being cut. Inert origins. In Wasteland, every object is either toon or inert. Toon objects have a bright and round appearance and can be dissolved with thinner, whereas inert objects are darker and are distorted and jagged in shape, and are immune to thinner. But what's never explained in the games is where exactly inert objects come from. But according to Chase Jones, inert objects are just toon objects that have become corrupted due to too much exposure to the blot. I really wish this was explained somewhere in the canon, because it would help the player understand just how much Mickey screwed up Wasteland. EM2 original box art and survey. When I was talking about the Epic Mickey 2 leaks, I said that I was going to save the survey thing for later, and well, here we are. In 2011, Disney sent out some marketing surveys to gauge interest in Epic Mickey 2, which asked the user how interested they'd be in the game based on a short description, which title they liked the best, and which cover art they liked the best. The gameplay description revealed a ton of information about the game, such as the game being multi-platform, 2-player mode with Mickey and Oswald, and Oswald's abilities like using electricity and flying like a helicopter. As for the 4 hypothetical titles, they were Epic Mickey 2 Return of the Mad Doctor, Epic Mickey 2 The Power of 2, Epic Mickey 2 Mystery on Main Street, and finally just Epic Mickey 2. And like I said earlier, this was all before the game was officially confirmed or announced or anything, so this survey was all we had to go off of until then. The Blot and the Blob comic. This one I actually had never heard of before researching for this iceberg. The Blot and the Blob is a comic released in 2019 that has an entry here because it actually has the first appearance of the Blot outside Epic Mickey itself. And I'm about to say Blot a lot, so try not to get confused here. The story follows the Phantom Blot, which if you don't know is the character that the Blot from Epic Mickey was based off of. The Phantom Blot breaks into a museum and stumbles upon a portal, which he uses to accidentally summon the Epic Mickey Blot. The Blot tries to attack him, but he sends him back through the portal to where it came from. It's just cool that the Blot and the very character that he was based off of had a whole comic together. Few people saw the full extent of the EMR leaks. This one isn't really true anymore because all the leaks are out on the internet now, but for a long time only a few of the leak videos made it out from the Function Point server onto other parts of the internet. The leakers said that they were sharing the videos only for the Function Point server, and that when Rebrushed came out they would be okay with having them be shared elsewhere. The leaker also deleted all of their messages after a few minutes, so only a couple people were able to download them before they were deleted. After that, most people were respectful to the leaker's wish and waited until the game came out to start sending them again. EM2 Portuguese dub. Epic Mickey 2 is playable in multiple different languages, either with full audio dubs or just subtitles. But it would seem that a Brazilian Portuguese dub was planned but was unfortunately eventually cut. Support for Brazilian Portuguese was added in one of the 3 updates that EM2 received on Steam, but only in subtitles. But it turns out that in the game files the cutscenes are fully dubbed in Brazilian Portuguese, but not any of the other in-game dialogue. So at the end of the day, Brazilian Portuguese never ended up being a selectable language for full audio even though all the cutscenes had fully finished dubs. Playable Hortensia in EM3. We don't know much about this one, but there is one piece of concept art by artist Scott McSorley showing some ideas for abilities Hortensia could have if she was a playable character in Epic Mickey. I'm not 100% sure if this was created for Epic Mickey 3, but Epic Mickey 1 was 1 player and Epic Mickey 2 was 2 player, so I guess it seems natural for Epic Mickey 3 to be 3 player. In this concept art, we can see Hortensia partially turning to stone and using her skirt to slowly float down to the ground. But yeah, this one piece of concept art is all we have to go off of as proof that Hortensia could have been playable in Epic Mickey 3. Unused sketches. Epic Mickey seems to have scrapped content for every aspect of the game, and the sketches are no exception. It turns out that alongside the TV sketch, watch sketch, and anvil sketch, there was also going to be a balloon sketch and fireworks sketch. In the cutscene files of EM1, we can see some very early and very short placeholder cutscenes showing the usage of a balloon sketch and fireworks sketch. Also in the game files, we can find an unused vending machine that includes the balloon and fireworks as well. Basically 2 unused mechanics inside another unused mechanic. Anyway, between the vending machine and the early cutscenes, it looks like the balloon sketch would have functioned very similarly to the fairy sketch in EM2, which is probably where the mechanic of the fairy sketch comes from. Similarly, the fireworks sketch would have been used to reveal secrets, and was most likely reworked into the bundles of fireworks you can find in EM2. THQ asked Disney to remake EM. Most of the time when it comes to remakes or remasters, the company that owns the IP of the game gets the idea to remake the game and then looks for a team to develop one. But in the case of Rebrushed, it's actually kind of the opposite. THQ Nordic was the one that approached Disney and asked if they could use the Epic Mickey IP to make a remake, and the project was almost entirely funded by THQ Nordic as well. So yeah, thanks THQ Nordic. Half-Life 2 Episode 3 was cancelled for EM. This one might sound crazy to you, but it does have merit behind it. In case you don't know, Half-Life is an FPS series of games by Valve, and Half-Life 3 is basically the single most anticipated game of all time. But unfortunately, we never got Half-Life 3, or a third episode to Half-Life 2 for that matter. But it turns out that a certain studio was working on a third episode to Half-Life 2, and that studio happened to be none other than Junction Point. And when Junction Point was acquired by Disney, they stopped working on it. After that, Junction Point started working on Epic Mickey, and as for the Half-Life game they were working on, it was sent over to another studio called Arcane Studios, but it was eventually cancelled. I could go into much more detail about the cancelled Half-Life entry and what it was going to be about and stuff, but Half-Life isn't the topic of this iceberg, so I'm going to move on. Mambo Jumbo. Mambo Jumbo is a level that was going to be in Rebrushed, but it was eventually scrapped and left out of the game. Mambo Jumbo is really interesting though because it would have been brand new to Rebrushed as it wasn't seen in any of the other games. It looks very pirate themed, so it could have been somewhere near Ventureland or Pirates of the Wasteland. As far as I'm aware, there isn't any surviving assets or anything referring to Mambo Jumbo in the game files, but thankfully 2 videos showing off an early version of the level was part of the leaks, so if it weren't for those leaked videos we wouldn't have known about Mambo Jumbo at all. Dumbo Projector. In EM2, a few projector levels based on the pink elephants on parade scene from Dumbo were going to be used to connect Fort Wasteland to the float yard, but they were eventually scrapped. Both of the levels can be played in the prototype banks, and they're actually not as unfinished as you might assume. According to Chase Jones, they were cut from the game because they just couldn't make them as fun as the other projector levels. It's also possible that the connection to alcohol from the scene would have raised the game's age rating, so they had to cut the levels entirely to keep the game rated E. But in Mean Street North, there are some spots where you can find the pink elephants in reference to this scene, so I'd rather just take Chase Jones' word. EM is canon to Smash Bros. This one is more of just a fun one to think about than anything. Sora from Kingdom Hearts is in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate as the last DLC character. So if Epic Mickey is canon to Kingdom Hearts, then you could do the whole if A equals B and B equals C then A equals C thing and say that Epic Mickey is canon to Smash. But we don't really have any evidence that Epic Mickey is canon to Kingdom Hearts, so it all kind of falls apart right there. But again, it's just a fun thing to think about. Tier 5. It's finally time for the 5th and final tier of the iceberg. The entries in here have very little information readily available on them and are only known by true Epic Mickey experts. But now's your opportunity to become a true Epic Mickey expert too, because I'm gonna go ahead and explain them now, starting with Never Was. Okay, so out of every entry on this iceberg and everything to do with Epic Mickey, this is my absolute favorite. Never Was is the name for an official concept about another world separate from Wasteland that pretty much would have acted as a second layer to Wasteland, where Wasteland was a place for characters forgotten from the real world and the cartoon world. Never Was a world for characters that are like seriously super forgotten, even by characters in Wasteland. Basically a land for those forgotten by the forgotten, which is just such a genius idea and makes you want to jump up and down and scream, but I probably shouldn't in case I break something. Anyway, this idea never ended up being explored in the games, but there are a couple of unused voice lines from EM2 that mentioned Never Was by name, albeit in a very vague manner.
I heard there's a place called Never Was, a place for all those tunes we've forgotten. Sounds crazy to me.
But the fact that these lines were written and then voiced implies that the developers might have had more plans for Never Was than we know about, and goddamn would I love to have seen that. Just know that you'll definitely end up hearing more about Never Was from me on this channel at some point. You are technically canon in Epic Mickey. This is a very interesting idea to think about because it actually kind of makes sense. So we all know that the tunes and merchandise in Wasteland are there because they're forgotten by the general public, as in forgotten by real people like you and me. Which means that in some way, all of us who don't remember these characters are partially responsible for these characters being forgotten in Wasteland and ultimately being included in the Epic Mickey games, which if you think about it would make you and me canon to Epic Mickey. Mind blown. Epic Mickey Rebrushed takes place after 2011. So we had an entry way earlier in the iceberg about how Epic Mickey might take place in 2010, but there's not an exact timeline for the game or anything. But there is one very small detail only in Rebrushed that would have to mean that it takes place at least after 2011. In the Through the Mirror projector, you'll come across a spinning globe that, as you would think, shows every country in the world. But if you look closely and maybe know a little bit about geography as well, you'll notice that in Rebrushed, the globe has South Sudan on it, which didn't exist until 2011 after they declared their independence. Furthermore, this same globe in the original Wii game does not have South Sudan. Obviously, this would be because the country just didn't exist when the game came out, but in terms of the Epic Mickey universe, this would have to mean that Rebrushed takes place at least after 2011 because of this, but not EM1. Or maybe we're just looking too far into it, that's probably more likely. Epic Mickey Rebrushed mistakes because of the wiki. Remember how in Tier 1 I mentioned that Purple Lamp used the Epic Mickey wiki as a resource when making Rebrushed? Well, it turns out that a mistake from the wiki ended up making its way into the final version of Rebrushed because of that. There could be more than one instance of this, but I only know of one, so maybe the entry's title was a little deceiving. Anyway, something that fans quickly noticed when Rebrushed came out is that every male goat NPC in the game was replaced with cow characters. For example, in EM1 and EM2, Lewis in Bog Easy was a goat, but in EMR his model was changed to be a cow. And this might have been due to a mistake on the wiki that was present on every page for the male goat characters, where they were incorrectly labeled as cows. But it goes deeper than that, because in the game files for Rebrushed, the Wii model for the male goat characters is present, but not a Rebrushed model, which could mean that the male goat model was never even intended to be included in the game. Again, possibly because of the mistake on the wiki. DuckTales Remastered was inspired from Epic Donald. This is more based on speculation and rumors than anything, but it's still cool to think about. In 2013, a remaster of the beloved NES game DuckTales was released for PS3, Wii U, and Xbox 360 and Windows, and mobile ports were later released by 2015. The rumor says that after Epic Donald was cancelled, Disney was still interested in making a game about the DuckTales world and characters, so they ended up making DuckTales Remastered instead. However, this rumor doesn't make as much sense when you take a look at the times at which the games were in development. Epic Donald started development in July 2011, but Disney was discussing the possibility of a DuckTales remake back in 2010. Furthermore, development of the game officially started in late 2011, which is when Epic Donald development was still happening. Despite this, you could still rework the rumor and say that Disney finally decided to start a DuckTales remaster after seeing development for Epic Donald start rather than end. If that's the case, then it is within the realm of possibility. Mickey will one day be forgotten. In itself, this is a pretty simple idea. At some point, the Mickey that everyone knows and loves will have to become a forgotten character and end up in Wasteland. But considering how all-encompassing Disney is, this would probably have to be after the end of human history. Although I don't doubt that there are certain versions of Mickey already in Wasteland from some more obscure cartoons and such, especially considering how much Mickey merchandise we see in Wasteland. But this entry is saying that Mickey as a whole will be forgotten and end up in Wasteland. And what if Epic Mickey, the game, becomes forgotten and ends up in Wasteland? Actually, that might be a little too meta for me, so let's move on. Masahiro Sakurai owns Power of Illusion. This one is more of a funny one, but it doesn't mean that Sakurai owns the rights to Power of Illusion or anything like that. The YouTube channel Masahiro Sakurai on Creating Games has, guess what, Sakurai talking about creating games. In one of these videos, he shows his collection of 3DS games, and among his collection is a physical copy of Power of Illusion. So look at that, mashed potato soccer guy plays Epic Mickey. We've really made it, haven't we? Epic Mickey was doomed from the start. This is a rather bleak perspective on how Epic Mickey 2 ended up failing and subsequently making the series be dormant for so long. Arguably the biggest reason for Junction Point's closure and Disney's disinterest in continuing the franchise was because they were more interested in making mobile games, simply because they have the potential to make more money. So what this idea is saying is that no matter how good the Epic Mickey series could have been, Disney wouldn't have cared and would have just gone with making mobile games instead. Which is pretty sad, but I can honestly see the perspective. The Man Who Sees Rabbits lost media. The Man Who Sees Rabbits is the name of an ARG created to promote Epic Mickey 2 that spanned across 14 videos on a YouTube channel of the same name. But unfortunately, the majority of the contents of this channel and its videos are lost media, as out of the 14 videos, we only have one video and 8 thumbnails, and we're even missing the title of one of the videos. The channel was created on October 25th, 2012, but the first upload, simply called The Man Who Sees Rabbits, wouldn't be uploaded until November 16th. One piece of information that might be very useful to finding all these videos is that we know that these videos were created by someone named Joshua Snyder, as it's on his portfolio. Here we can also read a short description of the series, which says, "This mockumentary chronicles a man on a journey to find the one rabbit that will put his mind at ease. This viral short was produced to hype the video game Epic Mickey 2: The Power of Two." This one has quite a bit more to it, but to save myself from going down a huge rabbit hole, no pun intended, I think I'm gonna save the rest for a future video or something because it definitely deserves one. All non-Walt Disney produced Oswald shorts are not canon to EM. After Walt Disney lost the rights to Universal, Oswald was still being featured in cartoons and comics for years, and he even had some different designs through the years. However, there's no mentions in Epic Mickey of any non-Disney Oswald media. But realistically, this is probably the case because Wasteland is a place for forgotten Disney cartoons, so the non-Disney Oswald stuff wouldn't have a place there. So ultimately, any Oswald media that has nothing to do with Disney can be considered non-canon to Epic Mickey. Epic history. Now it's finally time to talk about Epic History, which is something that I've already mentioned a couple times. Epic History, sometimes called Epic Mickey Online, is the name of a cancelled MMO game that would have taken place in the Epic Mickey universe. We actually have quite a bit of information about it, as well as some screenshots and concept art and stuff, but there's rarely any discussion about it online for some reason. Anyway, Epic History was in development sometime between 2010 and 2012, and was being developed by studios under the names of Go for Launch Productions, Godzilla, and Spaceface. It would have been available for iOS and PC, and interestingly, it was in development at the same time as another cancelled MMO game called Kingdom Hearts Fragmented Keys, which was also being worked on by Go for Launch Productions. There's some surviving concept art, model sheets, animations, and animation frames that were made for the game that are very cool to look at. Some characters that would have appeared in the game include Fanny Cottontail, Captain Hook, and Tinkerbell. The player would have been able to choose multiple different classes, such as the Lucky Rabbit class and the Ranger class, much like other MMOs. I just wish more people talked about Epic History, because there's so much we could go into here, and it would have made a pretty neat addition to the Epic Mickey franchise. Hortensia in EM is not the same Hortensia in the Walt Disney Oswald shorts. This one I pretty much already explained in the Hortensia's Origins entry from earlier, so I won't spend too much time on it. But yeah, in the Oswald cartoons, there were two characters meant to be love interests for Oswald by the names of Fanny Cottontail and Sadie, which are both separate characters from Hortensia in Epic Mickey. Toon personification theory. Hopefully I don't lose you on this one, and I'm not 100% sure that I understand it fully, but I'll try my best to explain it. We know that some characters in Epic Mickey, such as Clarabelle or Horace, are only specific versions of tunes that happen to be forgotten. So Clarabelle and Horace are still probably living in the cartoon world, and it's only certain iterations of them that are the ones we see in Epic Mickey. So the theory states that the characters in the cartoon world who have forgotten versions of themselves are built upon by their older and forgotten versions, and therefore embody these older versions of the characters within them, or in other words, are embodiments or personifications of them. The theory also goes on to say that these characters may or may not know about their forgotten selves, or that the qualities they embody are from older versions of themselves, and that this theory might not apply to all tunes in the cartoon world. Hopefully I was able to explain all of that correctly and in a way that makes sense. Epic Mickey iPad port. This one has almost no mention about it anywhere on the internet, and we only know about it because of something Chase Jones said on Discord one time. But yeah, an iPad port of the first Epic Mickey game was being developed by a studio called Kryptonite Games, and apparently it even made it to the prototyping phase, which is decently far in development. Of course, this port was eventually cancelled, and that's all the concrete evidence we have about this iPad port. Other than that, all we can really do is just speculate about it, like how it could work or control. But realistically, it probably wouldn't even be playable after Junction Point shut down, as they probably would have pulled it from the App Store after that. Universal Studios doesn't exist in the Epic Mickey universe. This one seems to explain itself, but there's more implications that surround it than you might think. It kind of builds upon the entry I talked about earlier about how the non-Disney Oswald cartoons aren't canon to EM. We know the story of Oswald and how Walt Disney lost the rights of him to Universal, but this story is never mentioned in the Epic Mickey games. Instead, the story that's presented to the player in the games is that the creation of Mickey and his success caused Oswald to fade into obscurity, which of course does not entirely line up with the real story of how Oswald became forgotten. Even after Mickey was created, several Oswald cartoons were created under Universal, but those are not mentioned at all in Epic Mickey. However, like I said earlier, it could be argued that these Universal Oswald cartoons aren't in Epic Mickey because they're not actually Disney cartoons, so they wouldn't belong in Wasteland. But strictly from the perspective of the EM universe, it can be explained away by saying that Universal simply doesn't exist in the scope of the EM games. Lonesome Manor graves are real people. This one sounds pretty scary, but don't worry, it's just about some Easter eggs. Outside the Lonesome Manor in EM1 and EMR, you can interact with these graves that prompt Gus to read some of the headstones. All of the graves are short poems describing the deaths of the people who lie under the graves, except all of the names of the people who are actually the names of people who worked at Junction Point or Purple Lamp. For example, one grave says, Mr. Jones, master of the chase, challenged the Reaper but lost the race, which is a reference to Chase Jones, who you should be familiar with at this point in the iceberg. But this is the last time he'll be mentioned in this video, so I guess it's kind of fitting to kill him off like this. Yen Sid is a god. This one can get really in-depth, but for the most part it is rather self-explanatory. This idea could quickly turn into a discussion about religion and everything that surrounds, but I'm gonna try to stray away from that. It's about the idea that Yen Sid is basically a god to Wasteland and the toons who reside within it. We know that Yen Sid is the creator of Wasteland, and we know that he puts in a lot of work maintaining it, as evidenced in the intro cutscene to EM1 and the Tales of Wasteland comic. And just to make this idea more interesting, we also know that Yen Sid is also a toon himself, which is kind of strange knowing that he's a toon managing the lives of all these other toons of his own kind. And beyond that, we already established earlier in the iceberg that the toons in Wasteland are self-aware of the fact that they're cartoon characters. But are the toons in the cartoon world aware of this, including Yen Sid? And just to try to confuse you more, Walt Disney's apartment is an Easter egg in EM1 and EM2, and judging by Gus's dialogue when you enter the room, he seems to be aware of who Walt Disney is, which complicates things more because Walt Disney would be an even higher power than Yen Sid, as the creator of these toons in the first place. I don't know, man. There's a lot more to cover with this idea, and all of it is very meta, but I'm gonna have to stop myself here before I get too deep. And that is the end of the Epic Mickey Iceberg. Once again, shoutouts to BrotherGunned for creating the iceberg and for giving me permission to edit it and use it in this video. There's a ton of entries here that I could make full videos about, so let me know in the comments what you guys are most interested in, as I plan to expand upon some of these ideas more in future videos. Or if you have other questions or need clarification on anything mentioned here, then leave a comment and I'll do my best to respond. Also, subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on future Epic Mickey content from me, and join the Discord server with the link in the description. Hopefully I'll see you guys around soon.